And well, first of all, overall, our destiny is ascension. That is inevitable no matter what. But we all had a destiny in terms of our roles, right? Of our higher self that we were here to step into. But what I personally feel, so you can take what resonates. I personally feel that the last couple of years, what happened was there's a few theories out there that I kind of agree with. You know, a lot of people talk about how nothing's been the same since 2020. And that is very, very true. Mom was still here. And I know from experience of being with her that I do believe that that whole thing that happened in 2020 was a huge planned event to basically slow down the ascension, to thwart it. There's no way to thwart it, but I think that they actually were able to slow it down. Now, of course, as mom would always say, everything the dark does serves the light, no matter what, no matter what. Everything they do serves the light. And so mom and the Galactics were able to flip the energy of, you know, what they had planned for 2020, where it actually became a mass awakening, right? There was a huge wave of awakeners during 2020 and beyond that from all of the events that happened. And in 2020 was actually the time, April of 2020 was when mom rewrote the divine plan. And, you know, Hope and I talked about that. And so I do feel that that was an attempt to slow down the ascension. Now, of course, we ended up having a huge awakening of people. And so there was a lot of great things that came out of that time. There's a lot of benefits that came from that experience. However, there was an adjustment that needed to be made. I do feel that's what mom was referring to at the time when she was talking about rewriting the divine plan. It was to make that adjustment to where probably what would have been happening earlier than now is now, you know, got postponed to 2024, 2025. So that total solar eclipse does feel very much to me like that's the line in the sand, right? The new moon in Pisces, the 7 seals, was the declaration of, yes, the trumpets are blaring. You know, you can read Revelations in an allegorical sense, right? The trumpets are blaring. The 7 stages of the mass awakening are now going to begin. And this is going to lead us up to that total solar eclipse, which is basically, that's the line in the sand. That's it, because we're getting a destiny reset and we're all going to finally be able to step into our destinies, which again, it wasn't that they weren't going to come, but they were postponed. So I feel the last couple of years, that's why we're like, why isn't it moving? Like, why aren't things happening, right? And there's a million answers to that question, but at the end of the day, I think we were doing a lot of work to catch up to where we were intended to be. So it was a lot of grunt work, a lot of energy work, but we've made it. So what's interesting here that I wanted to talk about today was the pole shift, right? So on the last episode, Hope and I, you know, had talked a little bit about the upcoming kind of transits, and that's when she had realized, oh shit, you know, around the 12th 13th of March, Jupiter moved into Gene Key 2. And so that's still at play right now, right? Before we get to the Aries Stargate that will open on the 19th, we have the equinox right after that. And then we have the full moon lunar eclipse in Libra, and then we have Easter. We'll cover that series of events, but this week and, you know, leading up to those events, I think Jupiter entering Gene Key 2 is kind of the headline news, because What is the pole shift, right? Like, what is it? So it's interesting because I think there's so many ways to interpret this, right? Number one is that the actual poles do shift, right? They scientists, whatever, have been able to see that in past times in history, the Earth's poles do shift. They shift to different locations, right? They can do an entire shift or like a tilt shift. And that corresponds to the ages, right? It corresponds to the precession of equinoxes. So we are, in fact, have been due for the pole shift, and the poles have been actively shifting. There's a girl I follow that does updates on this, and she had recently posted, she tracks the movement of the poles. And she had said, it had moved about 17 degrees, I believe it was, just in the last few years. So that's happening. Okay, so I'm just going to cover the physical pole shift, and then we're going to talk about what that means energetically and how that ties into Gene Key 2. So we know that the physical poles are shifting. This also contributes to the weather patterns, and the earth events. We also are in a solar maximum year, which actually was supposed to peak in 2025, but is peaking this year. And just so happens too that this is also the year that the sun's poles shift. And that's a regular occurrence that happens every 11 years. So the last pole shift we had was in 2013. So that's more of a regular occurrence as compared to the Earth's pole shifting, right? So the sun does shift its poles every 11 years, which of course creates catalysts. So we're due for that sometime within the next few months. And we don't know. I don't think it can be predicted. There's not like a day this is going to happen. But this is the year that the poles will shift. And I feel this is going to be sometime in March, April, May. Could be later than that, but that's my feeling. So that's a lot of energy in and of itself, right? Because we're at a time where our magnetosphere on our planet is almost completely gone. The magnetosphere is kind of that buffer around the Earth. And so during solar maximum years, that magnetosphere gets very, very thin. And if you follow anybody who does updates on that, they'll tell you, and they show videos of it, the shield is pretty much not there at all. It's like completely collapsed, which means that the sunbursts that we have, the solar flares, the geomagnetic storms, there's no buffer. So it's hitting us, and it's hitting us big. And so we don't know what it's going to look like when the sun's poles shift, earth poles are shifting. That's kind of the wildness of this process. Now, on an energy level, the poles shifting means a few things. One, we're shifting from the masculine pole to the feminine pole. Okay. So one manifestation of that is that we're shifting from the left brain to the right brain. The right brain was always supposed to be leading, but we've had the left brain leading for like 26,000 years because of the ego mind, right, which lives in the left brain. And so we've completely cut off the right brain, which is our connection to source. It's our intuitiveness. It's our divine antenna, right? Where we are able to connect to source and the angelic realm. We're connected to higher thought, imagination, limitless possibilities, that kind of thing. That's been cut off. So we are shifting from being left brain dominant to right brain dominant. And so this is why Mom used to put warnings out. She put warnings out for over 10 years where she said there's going to come a time where the ego mind itself, the programming, which lives in the left brain, won't be able to sustain, right? It's kind of like, let's say you have a computer, right? And it has a virus on it, right? Eventually, the computer's not going to work anymore because it has that virus. It's also very similar to, like, when you get when they come out with new softwares, right? They always want you to frickin' upgrade the software. It's the new version, but when you have an older phone or an older computer, those new updates don't work on it. It's kind of like that too. So she warned for a long time, like, listen, if you are not out of the mind and into the heart, it's going to be challenging, because basically that programming that's been running, and you're living inside of that programming entirely, right? And you are reliant on that programming, and suddenly it no longer can function because the poles are shifting, because the frequency is getting higher, right? Which requires us to shift the way we operate. It's a totally new operating system. And that operating system is the heart, the right brain, and the feminine pole. And she would say, like, in a lot of her old articles, she would talk about the implosion of the ego mind. And she would say, this can look like somebody completely glitching out. And if you've witnessed that, you know what it looks like, right? It's just a glitching where they don't know, like, what they're saying, or they start like spazzing out, and it can lead to kind of a breakdown. And so that's what we're going to start seeing. The logical, analytical, programmed way of thinking is going to not work anymore, because I've said this a lot, that one of the ego's famous phrases is, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, the issue with that is that, one, beliefs actually create reality, right? It's our thoughts and what we believe to be true actually creates the experience. So what they believe is what they see in reality. So if they're waiting to see something externally in order to believe something, that's the backwards way of creation. That it doesn't work like that. However, because enough of us are bringing in that vision, and we believe heaven on earth is coming into manifestation, new earth is coming into manifestation. Well, what's going to happen when they start seeing reality changing in whatever way that looks? At that point, you can't just be like, well, I believe it now. No, because the belief systems are so deeply ingrained in that ego programming that it's going to cause a complete mental break.